Hi, I'm Rosalie Marshall and I'm joined today by Jim Killock, the Chief Executive of the Open Rights Group, to discuss data and privacy. This will be the first part in a two-part series for our Information Overload Summit. Hi Jim.
Hiya, how are you doing?
So before embarking on a new technology initiative, what should organisations do to ensure customer and staff privacy?
Well, there's a certain amount of this that we sort of try to tell governments in particular repeatedly because of the disasters they've had in privacy with government databases, which is think about it first. Don't try to remedy privacy problems further down the track because it clearly costs a lot and it's very difficult actually to rectify those problems. So think about privacy and security as allied themes. That if you get privacy right, you've probably got security right, and security and privacy, they just go hand in hand. So think those things through. Think about the privacy implications of what you're doing before you start planning the project, and you may even save money, but you certainly won't necessarily incur massive extra costs. But what you will do is get those problems right so that you won't incur massive costs later down the track when you realise exactly how damaging or privacy unfriendly your solutions are. So think about it first.
Okay, and a lot of it doesn't only rely with the business, of course, it relies with the individual. What can individuals do to maintain control of their data? In fact, can they actually maintain control of all their data online? Well,
obviously, it's not totally down to the individual to get this right. The law is there to protect individuals, and we need to make sure that the law is enforced properly. Individuals should take responsibility. They should try to look at privacy agreements. They should try to opt out of things, perhaps when they don't really need to opt in. But you know, it isn't just down to us. We have to also trust the organisations that we're engaging with, and perhaps we should also think about which organisations we do trust with our data.
Okay, how much do you, from conversations I actually had with Richard Thomas, who's their previous Information Commissioner, he once said that Britain is sleepwalking into a surveillance society because of the number of databases and the tracking of government individuals' information by government. How much do you believe Britain is now a surveillance state?
Well, as we said, that independent studies show us to be one of the worst countries after China and Russia. So I think there's every reason to be worried. And I think if we compare our sort of habits on this in installing CCTV, as Richard Thomas says, creating new databases, DNA databases, NHS centralised databases, all kinds of other information, then we have to say that Britain has pretty bad instincts as a society, and particularly as a sort of set of government institutions compared to countries in the continent, for instance, where they've perhaps got much more experience of why privacy abuses really can be a problem, how privacy abuses can undermine the rights of individuals, and are therefore more protective as cultures, as government cultures. So I think that we are, in a sense, a surveillance society already, but the worst of it is that the civil service, I think, just hasn't really understood what it is that they're doing and how it is that they have to change their habits. And that's going to take an act of political will. And that's not just down to politicians, that's also down to activists and community organisations and campaigners to, you know, and all of us to actually get involved in that and stand up for our rights, so that it is understood by government and by politicians that privacy concerns are important to us, and that we don't want to feel like we live under constant surveillance.
Yeah, that's right, because one of the things that you're doing at the Open Rights Group is a big campaign against the government's Intercept Modernisation Programme. Can you tell me exactly what you're doing in that area?
Well, what we've done is ask people to write to their MPs to help with the consultations and to respond to those, and we've been fairly effective in that, I think, along with groups like No to ID, Liberty and others, who have made it quite clear that these are not acceptable proposals. What that has demonstrated is that there is going to be political resistance, campaigning resistance to this sort of measure, and a lot of people in the public, I think, have got very disturbed by the potential for the government to essentially intercept every single piece of communication they do on the internet, store who they're communicating with, and perhaps analyse that data. People don't like that idea. That's very, very clear, and for that reason, this close to an election, the government's not trying to push those plans forward. What remains to be seen is who gets elected, and then what they do, and whether they can rein the wilder elements in the security apparatus in the state in a little, and say, hang on, people's rights matter, and we've got to make people feel safe, and part of people feeling safe is that they trust their government. And if we proceed down the lines of trying to collect surveillance information on everybody all the time, people won't trust the government, and that will actually undermine security.
Because one of the things the Tories are proposing is to kind of understand that the government shouldn't be responsible for all this data at all, and to take away the government's responsibility of super databases and to hand a lot of it to the private sector. One example is the idea to store medical health records with Google and Microsoft. What were your thoughts on these proposals?
I think this sounded a little bit of if I may say, a slightly ad hoc policy proposal that hadn't been perhaps completely thought through. I don't think the answer to the government having problems with databases is necessarily to simply hand it over to very large private corporations. I don't think that's necessarily the answer at all. Whoever handles data, we need to know it's safe, it's secure, and that our rights are respected. Some of the best models for health data, which is what particularly prompted this, have been sort of local systems in places like the Netherlands and other countries where data's handled by relatively local hospital systems, and it's just made interoperable, so the extent to which information does ever need to be shared, it's both clear who's having consent and whether that consent is granted, and systems are interoperable, so things like purchasing and so on can be done collectively. So health systems, our own data, I don't think necessarily the solution is private, but perhaps that's a different question to can the government do it? I think perhaps more local solutions are the answer, rather than simply saying, well, this should all be mega corporations looking after our data. But we have to actually see what the Conservatives are proposing, I guess. I say I don't think this was particularly well thought through proposal from them.
Do you think the government as a whole, and particularly, for example, kind of surveillance bodies such as the ICO, not really surveillance, but who are meant to kind of protect our data privacy, do you think they've got enough technology expertise within their organisations?
Well, no, basically. This is a really, really strange situation where the Information Commissioner still doesn't have in-house specialist people who understand how to, what these technologies do and how you can make the best use of them. That's a clear failing. It's one that the ICO have admitted publicly, but I've been in this job for 7-8 months, and there's still no sign of any real change, and I expect that's probably going to be the case in a year's time at this rate, and people have certainly been complaining about it for the better part of a decade, as I understand. So we get very slow movement on this. I mean, it's a similar problem in the government, I think, in the civil service, that they have essentially expected to always rely on private contractors and people selling them systems to tell them how these things work, rather than employing experts themselves who can make perhaps a more careful and balanced assessment of what these systems are about and what they can do.
Okay. All right, Jim. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. So, if it's possible, the other thing I wanted to say is just that with the ICO, with the Information Commissioner, he has powers over our data, as in data protection, so he doesn't have enough powers over that, but we have nobody responsible for interception, and the government's in trouble with the EU over that at the moment, and there's these infraction proceedings which are dragging on, have again very publicly put the government under spotlight for the fact that we don't have anyone to complain to.